Good morning, Nigeria. Welcome to today's newspaper review. Let's take a look at the stories dominating today's newspaper headlines. But first, we'll start from the Daily Trust newspaper. On the Daily Trust newspaper, which is boldly written there, how gang murdered Benue Miyati Allah chairman's friend. At the top of the newspaper on page 27, which is written there, petrol price still high, says FCCPC. No comment on arrest of bandits returning from Hajj, coming from Katsina government, saying that no comment on arrest of bandits returning from Hajj. To get that story, go to page 19 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the Daily Times. On the Daily Times, which is boldly written still on FCCPC warns oil marketers, threatens sanctions over pump price exploitation. At the bottom of the newspaper, INEC allegedly denies NDC access code to upload candidate names. INEC allegedly denies NDC access code to upload candidate names. At the top of the newspaper, troops foil terrorist attack, recovers arms at Benue Yam Market. Still at the top of the newspaper, bank loses $2 million in ATM cyber heist as Nigerian SAT warns of new wave of attacks. At the bottom of the newspaper, INEC allegedly denies NDC access code to upload candidate names. Why are INEC denying NDC access code to upload their candidate name? To read more on that story, go to page 2 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to The Guardian. On The Guardian, which is boldly written on page 6, 58 insurance raised against time to meet recapitalization deadline. At the top of the newspaper on page 3, Senate defends state police bill as child of necessity. Senate defends state police bill as child of necessity. INEC releases access code today as APC rejects fake list of candidates. INEC are releasing their access code today, and as APC rejects fake list of candidates. To get that story, go to page 3 of the Guardian newspaper. Still in the Guardian newspaper, doctors give federal government fresh 4-week deadline over unpaid allowances. Doctors give federal government fresh 4-week deadline over unpaid allowances. To read more on that story, go to page 2 of the newspaper. Still at the bottom of the newspaper, Dixon Kwankwaso meets as NDC alleges INEC denied portal access. Dixon, who is the chairman of the NDC party, and Kwankwaso, who is the vice presidential candidate for the NDC, are meeting INEC to know why they are being denied portal access. To read more on that story, go to page 6 of the Guardian newspaper. Away from that newspaper to The Punch. On The Punch, which is boldly written on page 2, Obi Kwankwaso lead NDC's battle against deregistration. To read more on that story, you go to page 2 of the Punch newspaper. Operation Kosaye. Police hunt kidnappers in Lagos, Ogun forest. To read more on that story, go to page 9 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, on page 21, chaos as flooding shuts Lagos Airport's temporary terminal. Chaos as flooding shuts Lagos Airport's temporary terminal. Kogi teacher dies after alleged assault for disciplined pupil. That is so painful. Kogi teacher dies after alleged assault for disciplined pupil. To read more on that story, go to page 5 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the Nigerian Tribune. On the Nigerian Tribune, which is boldly written on page 7, concerns over high cost of petrol. Concerns over high cost of petrol. At the top of the newspaper, Providius Unity Bank set to commence operations as one unified institution. This is coming from Providius and Unity Bank. They are set to commence operation as one unified institution. They are going to merge together, Providius Bank and Unity Bank. To read more on that story, go to page 14 of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. Still at the top of the newspaper, Osun CSOs suspend protest, give IGP 72 hours to redeploy police commissioner. To read more on that, you go to page 4 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, 2027, anxiety grips candidates as INEC releases codes for upload. To read more on that story, you go to page 2 of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the Vanguard. On the Vanguard, on page 11 of the Vanguard, which is boldly written, federal government orders struggling to meet obligations despite rise in revenue. At the top of the newspaper, Peter Obi can't beat Tinubu in Lagos again, says presidency. That Peter Obi can't beat Tinubu in Lagos again. Let's see how it goes in 2027 election. To read more on that story, go to page 8 of the newspaper. On page 28 of the newspaper, which is written, FCCPC to marketers, cut petrol prices or face sanctions. This is still coming from the FCCPC to marketers, that they should cut petrol prices or face sanctions. To read more on that, you go to page 28 of the newspaper. 2027 timeline. INEC parties disagree over access code for candidates. To read more on that story, you go to page 5 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, Sirap gives Akpabio Abbas 1 week to probe 6.3 billion naira constituency funds or face legal action. This is coming from Sirap. They are giving Akpabio Abbas 1 week to probe 6.3 billion naira constituency funds, or they will face legal action. To read more on that story, go to page 8 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the New Telegraph. On the New Telegraph, which is boldly written on page 4, 9, and 10 of the newspaper, on primaries, APC disowns list of successful candidates in circulation. APC disown list of successful candidates in circulation. This is coming from the primaries. At the top of the newspaper, autonomy, government sustain hold on council funds, hijack 2.514 trillion naira since January. To read more on that, you go to page 3 of the newspaper. This is still from Providius and Unity Bank to commence operation as unified institutions. To read more on that story about Providius Unity Bank to commence operation together as a unified institution, you go to page 20 of the New Telegraph newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, lawyers back special court for kidnappers, bandits trial. Lawyers back special court for kidnappers, bandits trial. To read more on that story, go to page 2, 3, 14, and 16 of the newspaper. Still at the bottom of the newspaper, NAD declares industrial disputes, gives federal government 4 weeks to avert doctor strike. To read more on that story, go to page 3 of the newspaper. Away from that newspaper to the leadership. On the leadership, which is boldly written on page 4, on oil price drop. Still on FCCPC, warns fuel importers, refiners, orders against exploiting consumers. FCCPC warns fuel importers, refiners, and others against exploiting consumers. To read more on that story, go to page 4 of the leadership newspaper. Akume condemns killings of Benue Miyetti Allah chairman. 10 arrested. To read more on that story, go to page 7 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, resident doctors threaten nationwide strike, give federal government 4 weeks ultimatum. To read more on that story, go to page 6, why resident doctors are threatening nationwide strike and they're giving federal government 4 weeks ultimatum. Lastly, in the same leadership newspaper, 8 die, 17 injured in Katsina road crash. This is so painful. To read more on that story, you go to page 24 of the leadership newspaper. And that's all for today's newspaper review. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates. I'm Chidera Eso. Do have a beautiful day.